Okay, everyone, welcome to session 6. Can you please raise your hand and let us know that you can hear us and that you can see our screen? Okay, yeah. So, okay, there's a few of you that we're not getting anything from. So, Gabby, Dawn, if you could just raise your hand. Jane, Kelly, and we know that Shabana has problems at the moment. Okay, Dawn. Okay, so there's a couple of people, I think. So just Dawn and Kelly as well. Okay, just sorry, guys, just going to ask one more time. If you could all put your hands down and then just ask you one more time to raise your hand if you can see the screen. It should be a PowerPoint slide, and if you can hear us. Thank you. Okay.
So Kelly and Jane
and Dawn.
And Dawn.
Okay, yeah, put your hands down. Thank you very much. Okay. Do you want to start?
Okay, and this is just the events.
Okay, we're going to begin, and I'll contact people that are not here.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. While Latifa tries to figure out and confirm that everyone can see us and hear us, we are going to have, we're going to go ahead and have a start. Welcome to session 6. The topic for this session, this is our second session on research for design. Last week we were looking at some of the steps that you would use. This week we're going to be looking at the steps that you're using for action research. Next week we're going to look in a little bit more depth about validity and reliability. Now, I know that the readings that we gave to you this week introduced both validity and reliability because you need to be thinking about both of those things as you begin to think about the steps that you'll use for your action research project. But we are going to be discussing both of those in greater depth next week. The following week, we'll be actually talking about data collection and data analysis. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we're going to be going in the next couple of weeks. The question that we are focusing on today is, what steps will I take to conduct my action research? And again, I hope that all of you in preparation for today had an opportunity to read the case study and think about the questions that were detailed in the course guide, because we are going to be going back to those questions today. I hope you also had an opportunity to use the Learning Log 6.1 to draft some of the ideas that you have about the steps that you'll be taking conducting to do your action research, because again, those are going to form the foundation for today's research. Right now, we are still waiting for Kelly, and we know that Simon is going to be a couple minutes late because he had bus duty, so we expect that Simon is going to be joining us shortly. We're going to check back in with everyone just prior to our paired chat to see who we have with us, just to confirm that we have everyone before we assign partners. So welcome back, everyone. I want to start out this week by looking at and talking about the case study that was part of the materials pack that we sent you in preparation for today. Again, as part of that assigned reading, you looked at a case study which was written by Christine Grant. Her case study was published online by Otterbein University, which is in Westerville, Ohio. And we're going to be referring to the article and to the questions that were in the Session 6 course guide for this first activity. So to begin with, I want to go back to those questions that I gave to you in the course guide, and I want you to just think about for a moment. I know that when we gave this assignment, I didn't ask you to write out the responses, but I'd suggested that perhaps you might highlight the article itself in areas that responded to some of these questions. So it would be useful if you could either pull that up on your screen or take it out if you have it in paper copy. And I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to kind of get organized. I want to talk first about these first three questions. What happened in this research study? What data collection methods were used? And how has the researcher used an experimental and control group? Again, in just a moment, we're going to go through those questions one at a time, and I'm going to ask people to kind of share what you saw in that article that responds to those questions. But I'm just going to give you a moment again to get organized, to find the article, and to get ready to respond. So I'm going to give you about a minute. Thank you for taking a couple of moments to organize your thoughts. If we could, I would like to start with question one, and that is what happened in this research study? Again, if you could raise your hand if you would like to help us by responding to that question. You don't have to tell us everything that happened. You can tell us some of the pieces that you recalled or some of the pieces that you found interesting, and we'll ask some other people to contribute their ideas as well. So again, if you could raise your hand to respond to that first question, what happened in this research study? Kelly.
Okay, hi Kelly, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. The teacher in this case is a fourth grade teacher who helps students in special education with a variety of different disabilities, and she had two sections of the course that she did literacy pull-out with, so she separated them into two classes and worked with one as a control and one as a experimental group, and she wanted to see how readers theater might help improve both their students' literacy and their attitudes toward reading in school.
Okay, fantastic, thank you.
That's great. Kelly, and I think that was actually very, very thorough. I don't know, is there anyone else who would like to add to that? I know that in my reading of the case study, I didn't find a lot more, but if there's someone who wants to add to that, please go ahead and raise your hand.
No, I think that's about it, Ben.
Okay, well, let's go on to question number two. What data collection methods were used in this research study? And again, you don't have to list the complete list. List the ones that you noted, list the ones that you thought were interesting, and we'll get other people to contribute.
Okay, we've got Dee. Hi, Dee.
Hiya. She used pre-testing that was done at the beginning of the year. She also did post-testing after the intervention, and in fact she used three tests that she had pre-testing and then post-testing with. She also used her own field notes, which I jotted down. It was like a teacher's journal really that she kept throughout the intervention to record her own thoughts and observations. Whoops.
Dee, thanks for that. The three tests that she used in the post-testing, could you say a little bit more about those? I don't want to put you on the spot, but could you say a little bit more about the test that she used in the post-test?
To be honest, no, not really,
Okay.
because I didn't read through those as thoroughly as I could have done.
No, and your response, I mean, you kind of outlined exactly the data collection methods that she used. Does someone else want to add something to Dawn, please?
Didn't she use the DIBELS, which is a standardized test
She
for
did.
her pre-testing and post-testing?
She
She used 2 forms of the DIBELS, and then she used an attitude survey, I believe it was, or something like that, to look at a kid's attitudes while reading at school.
Yes. Dawn, thank you very much. One of the reasons that I wanted to kind of dig a little deeper and actually identify the assessment tools that this teacher used is that she used a number of standardized assessments. And of course, one of the benefits of using a standardized assessment is that as a researcher, you make an assumption that they have measures of validity and reliability built into them as part of those being established as standardized measures. Interestingly, she combined those standardized measures with her own field notes. And of course, the standardized measures are more likely to produce quantitative data, where her field notes were much more likely to produce qualitative data. But she used a whole range of assessments in order to give her the information and data that she needed to arrive at a conclusion or to analyze and produce results around her study. Our third question is how has the researcher used an experimental and a control group in this particular study?
Okay, Jane.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. She had the 2 groups, an afternoon group and an earlier group, I think, and she used one first and then the other one second as the control group she used second as an experimental group or an intervention group, and then she compared the results for each of them.
Yep. Jane, can you say a little bit about how kids found themselves in one of those 2 groups?
No.
Okay, that's fine.
Depth is not my strong suit today. Yes.
Okay, no worries.
How about somebody else? Denise?
Denise, yeah. Okay, Denise.
Hi, no, I do recall this because I found it interesting that the principal randomly assigned, I guess chose, is that correct?
It is. Can I ask Denise, if you were going to use a control group and an experimental group, why might it be a good idea to have the principal or the head of the school be this person responsible for selecting those groups?
Well, it's obviously more objective and it lends a certain degree of validity to that particular choice.
Yep. We're going to talk a little bit more about how you actually pick your sample sizes in just a couple of minutes. But it's interesting, although the study didn't actually say it, one of the other inferences that I made is that there perhaps was an advantage in having the principal or the head of school pick, because there may have been, there was the potential for parent concern over this type of research study where one group is actually getting the benefit of an intervention and another group is not. And it could be that for ethical reasons and for reasons of having the support of the school administration, that this particular teacher decided that she wasn't going to be the person who actually selected which children were going to receive the program and which children weren't. So again, kind of an interesting, nuanced kind of consideration to keep in mind as you begin thinking about your action research project. Thank you, everybody, for those responses. I want to go through something the wrong way.
Jane's got her hand up, does she? So, Jane, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Oh, no, sorry, I'll put it down.
Sorry.
So before we move on to the next set of questions, I just wanted to say a little bit more about the use of experimental and control groups. The use of control and experimental groups is typically used in empirical research, although they can be used in action research. One of the challenges is that practitioners have to ensure that their research designs are in compliance with ethical practice and that students who are placed in either of those groups are not harmed or disadvantaged as a result of being assigned to one group or the other. I want to say just a couple things about a different study, one that you didn't read about, but just to give it as an example. This study took place in South Korea. It was looking at a technique called mind spa audio-visual stimulation. And what it is it was a study that was looking for the effect of mindfulness practices on test scores. And in this particular study, a group of students was randomly selected to receive mindfulness training, and they participated routinely in a meditation exercise prior to test taking. Now, the control group in this study simply turned up to take the test as they always had. One of the things to keep in mind, and one of the questions that you need to answer as a researcher, is by forming a control group and an experimental group, was either group harmed or disadvantaged? And you can see that while the mindfulness group here, which was the experimental group, may have benefited slightly, at the same time, there wasn't harm or disadvantage to the other group. I mean, this was, these kinds of things need to be really carefully considered and weighed, because it's very important that that doesn't happen. In a school situation especially, you could see that if you were going to divide your class into two groups and half of the class was going to get some fantastic new teaching approach and the other half was just going to do the same old thing, that not only would parents become very upset, but it actually would be unfair to those children who didn't have the benefit of the innovative practice that you were about to introduce. An important thing with studies that involve control groups and experimental groups is that if there is found to be a benefit of the intervention, the assumption is then that all students would be recipients of that intervention and they would all benefit from it equally. But again, you need to be careful in the actual design of the study that you're not disadvantaging or harming students in either group. I want to just say a little bit more about random assignment of students, because in the case study that you read, it indicated that the principal randomly selected the students. And one of the most effective ways to do that is that if you generate a student list of all the students who are the potential students who could participate in an intervention, and assign numbers to them, so that they might be alphabetically, and then they'll get a number based on their position in alphabetical order. You could then use a random numbers generator, which there are a bazillion of them on the internet. They're primarily designed for people who gamble, but they also work for people who are doing action research. And what you would do is, in this particular example with this particular number generator, you would say, in this example, you needed 10 students. So the number of randoms to generate is 10. You only want one set because you're only going to have an experimental group. The range represents the numbers of students in your class. So if you have 54 different students and there are 54 numbers, the low would be 1, the high would be 54. As soon as you hit that, the computer is going to randomly give you 10 numbers out of the 54, or in this case, out of the 100 students who were part of that bigger group. Now, one of the reasons that it's important to do this is that the alternative to doing a random sample is to either include all of your students, and in many situations that may be the obvious thing to do and it may be the right thing to do. But you may be, for example, looking at an intervention that is for the entire 9th grade, and one of your data collection methods might be focus groups. If you were going to run focus groups that involved every single student in the 9th grade, number one, it would take a huge amount of time, and then you would need to think about how you were actually going to group them so that you had the balance of kids who were assertive versus kids who might be a little bit reticent to speak. You would quickly find yourself kind of just completely consumed by trying to make choices in order to generate data that is valid and reliable. When in fact the most effective way to do that, if you were doing the entire 9th grade and you had 100 9th graders, you may only want to do 2 focus groups, and you may only want 10 students from each group. So a random number generator is the most effective way to be certain that the children who are part of those 2 groups, not only that they're participating, but which group they're in, are not being biased by your perceptions or your knowledge of those students. Whenever you create a sample, either just by using all the students in your class, or for example, if you were going to do the The focus groups, if you were to stand in the entrance area and you were going to pick the first 20 kids who came in, that's called a sample of convenience. And there are lots of ways that a sample of convenience can go wrong. Again, in the example of the focus group, if you were going to pick the first 20 kids who came through the front door, one of the risks that you would run is that students may be coming through in social groups. And so you may get 5 kids who belong to one social group, you may get a single kid who's not part of that group, and you may get 3 or 4 more kids who are part of another group. And again, the balance of that discussion would be very different because you have kids who already have established social connections. You also may get kids who are just prompt and punctual and generally have better organizational skills. And depending on the question, that could also influence the result of your focus group. So random assignment is something that you always want to try to do in an experimental method. And again, one of the other ways that you might use it is that you might actually collect data from 100 students. You may choose to analyze all of that data, or you may choose to analyze a random sample of that data if it involves a lot of in-depth analysis of qualitative information.
Ruslan would just like to make a comment.
Yep, Ruslan.
So just going to turn, I'm having them. Yeah, just need to unmute him. Okay, Ruslan, go ahead. Do you want to make your comment?
Hi, yes, I just would like to make a comment about ethical issues and randomization. I like the the reminder that we need to consider ethical implications of our actions and studies. For example, the picture you've shown with meditation in different cultures that can be perceived differently, and the meditation. In some cultures, and I'm speaking right now about Russia, for example, would be very close on the borderline with practices like hypnosis, and so that could lead to wide discussions whether such study would actually be ethical or not. But another comment is about randomization of well, it's not a comment, it's actually a question. Yeah, after having selected the sample or having selected the students, say out of 100, I've selected 50, that would be in a control group and 50 in the experimental group. My question is, would a researcher go through a profile of the students selected to make sure that the randomly selected students do, in case, represent different, profiles. So this is a pure chance, and with smaller samples, however, that can be a problem if a random number generator put into the experimental group all the students that are really good at math, or vice versa. So my question is, to what extent would you be looking at the randomly selected sample? Would you control it?
Yep. So Ruslan, that's a fantastic question. It has a fairly complicated answer, but one of the things that I might say that I didn't mention it in my really brief kind of description of how you randomize a sample is that there are methods for determining an optimal sample size. So your question about once you've selected the sample, how do you know that sample is representative of the larger population? There are some kind of pre-test pieces that you can do to determine what that optimal sample size is. Now, in a lot of action research, you actually are using all the students in your class rather than randomizing a sample. But occasionally you'll be doing something, as I said, like at the level of the 9th grade, and you might be collecting individual student data using some assessments, but then you might be randomizing other data assessment tools. Like, for example, if you had an individual survey, you wouldn't necessarily randomize the survey. You'd use the data from the entire survey from all of the students. But if you're using something like a focus group, which is much more time intensive and produces a lot more data, you'd be using different data collection methods so that you would never be relying on one data collection method to show you the entire picture, if you know what I mean. But again, there are ways to calculate optimal sample size. And if you were going to use random sampling as your primary data collection tool, you would want to do those optimal sample size calculations. I can send you.
Yeah.
I can post some things on that talk about how to calculate optimal sample size.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. And I do understand that there are ways and to design that with specific intervals for what's called not trust. The other word, something like trust intervals. 95%. Is that the ones?
So you're talking about confidence intervals of statistics, or you're talking about?
Right. So, because you use those in order to select the optimal sample size, but my point is rather different, and especially with classroom practices and projects that we would be doing, our sample sizes would be small. And I participate in one of the action researches right now, where I am just collecting the data, and the sample is really small. So when I click select randomly the students, how do we know that the random number generator did not select the students that are having the certain profile, so some specific feature about those students?
Yep. So one of the things that's built into your assumption is that the demographic of the student is going to change the result. And again, that's one of the reasons why you use some assessments that use randomized samples, because a lot of the other assessments you're going to be using are going to have some of your assumptions about how to establish a valid a population that will give you valid and reliable data. So again, you won't know that random sample represents some kind of demographic mean or some kind of demographic average of all the students, but that's why it's randomized. You would also typically have more than one randomized sample, again, just in terms of the different ways that you collect data. The other thing to keep in mind, which kind of comes into play here, is that oftentimes as an action researcher, you are going to be using a very, very small sample size. But the information that you generate, what you learn from that action research project, is considered usable knowledge. It's knowledge that you as the teacher can use if you did that activity again, if you worked with a similar group of kids in a similar way. Action research typically doesn't produce generalizable knowledge that applies to the classroom down the hall or the school across the city or the school in the other country. And in those kinds of studies, you would want to use a lot more empirical methods than just action research methods. Yeah. So it's good to it's a lot of things to kind of keep in your mind at one time, but all of those things influence how you set up your sample sizes and how much data you need to collect and what types of data you need to collect.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. So thank you again for that question. This is just a final slide, just as a reminder that one of the things that SIM is going to be working toward is actually developing these ethical guidelines for action research in our schools. Most schools that take this on do, at this point begin thinking about those things, and it's something that will be on our list of things to do as we go forward. But always, the biggest concern is to make sure that whatever you're designing doesn't harm or disadvantage students in your class, keeping in mind all those cultural considerations. Some of the things that Ruslan just mentioned are also very, very important when you're introducing an innovation. All right, I want to move on to the next question, and I'm just going to give you one question this time, so I'll give you just a couple of seconds to think about this and reflect on it. What were the strengths and weaknesses of the case study? All right, let's start our discussion with the strengths. So if you'd like to offer some of the strengths that you saw in this case study, please raise your hand.
Okay, we have D. D, do you want to?
Yeah, the thing that struck me most was the use of the Reader's Theatre, because of it being entertaining and really engaging the students' interest, and then they're wanting to participate.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We also have Dawn. Okay, go ahead, Dawn.
Okay, so she also created a baseline, so she had a very definitive point as to where she started, and she took her information from multiple sources of data.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else?
Anyone else for strengths?
No? No more takers?
Yeah. I'm just going to offer up some of the things that we heard already in responses to the first two questions that actually are also relevant to this question. We talked about the fact that she used a number of standardized assessments. And again, those assessments would, you could assume that they have high levels of validity and reliability already built into them. She used a comparison or a control group and an experimental group so that she could see that with the similar population of students, how the intervention, what the scale of the intervention was, because certainly with both groups she would have continued to work on the literacy skills. In the discussion, she presented the results from each of the different data collection methods and then combined them in the analysis to suggest how they related to one another. And also the use of a survey, which is primarily qualitative data, to verify some of the quantitative data that she was collecting with the standardized assessments would have been considered strengths of the study. Let's move on to weaknesses. What weaknesses did you notice in the study?
Okay, we've got Louise. Louise?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent, good. Okay, so I think one of the weaknesses that stood out for me was in the introduction when she was doing the review of the literature, it was very one-sided. So it talked about positives. It didn't really have anything from the other side. Also, she said that the principal randomly assigned the students, but she didn't actually say how that took place. So I thought that was quite weak. And I actually had the ethical issue of having the control group with the experimental group at the back of my mind as well. The fact that there were only 12 students obviously makes it obviously not generalizable. Also I wasn't quite sure with the actual results because I don't know much detail. She said there's a significant gain, but I don't know whether that was true or not without having to know, you know, about the actual test and the data.
Louise, that's great. Thank you so much. Does anyone have anything to add? We have Kelly.
Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I was just thinking a little bit about how she had sort of subdivided the experimental group into two further groups, and one was receiving even more help from her, and so I kind of wondered how adding that variable in would have affected what she was studying.
Great, thank you for that. Anyone else? Jane.
Okay, Jane.
Hi, yeah. Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. The pre-test time lag, by her own admission, it was administered at the beginning of the year and not right directly before the experiment. So there is a slight question hanging over whether any changes that happened could have happened between the start of the year and the beginning of the experiment as well. So slight question of validity, plus also the length of time of her study. It was only 4 weeks.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was pretty comprehensive. I have. Can I throw in just a couple more because they? Oh, Ruslan. Before I do that.
Okay, Ruslan.
Hi, again, I wanted to say that one of the weaknesses as well is the morning and afternoon selection, and the activity is reading, and I wonder how do students, how their performance in reading differs in terms of time of the day. They can be better readers in the morning rather than afternoon. So again, that the control experimental group issue.
Great, thanks for that, Ruslan. That was one of the things I was going to add. Yeah, a couple of other quick things to add to that really kind of rich mix of responses is that with an intervention like this, one of the things that is difficult to distinguish is that whether or not the small improved results that she noticed were actually linked to the intervention or to the fact that it was a novel approach to what had been happening in the classroom. Teachers will recognize that one of the reasons that you change your pedagogical approach is to keep kids kind of engaged and enjoying what they're doing. That variety of tasks oftentimes in itself will boost learning. And so there was no real way to separate the effect of the fact that it was a brand new, exciting, engaging approach from the fact that it might have been any brand new, exciting, engaging approach that may have yielded a similar result. The other challenge with a study like this is because she only looked at it for 4 weeks, there are real questions about how long those improvements could be sustained. So for example, if you did Reader's Theater for 8 weeks, would students continue to show improvement over that 8-week period, or would you reach a point where they would plateau and you would no longer see any more improvements? So because the study was only 4 weeks long, and she didn't really look at change over time to see at what point this intervention stopped being effective. And again, that relates to the other point I made, which is that teachers typically change their approaches in order to keep things fresh and to keep kids engaged. And how long could you keep using this intervention to see the same kind of result? So again, thank you very much for those observations of strengths and weaknesses. We're going to move on to the last 2 questions. And those are, what questions does this case study raise? And specifically, what does it raise for you in terms of the research questions that you're asking? And what did you learn from the case study that you could use to address your own action research question? I'm going to give you a moment to reflect on these, and I'm going to ask you to respond to either or both of them in just a moment. Okay, if anyone would like to respond to either or both of those questions, what questions does the case study raise? What did you learn from the case study that you could use to address your action research question? Please raise your hand.
Ruslan. Okay, go ahead, Ruslan.
All right, I would like to say that the question of control and experimental group, for me, in my case, would be a really big issue. And having looked at this study, I realized that I will have no chance to have a experimental and control group learning at the same time because I have only one class. So one of the ways I was looking to compare the results was the previous study period and the result, students' achievement at the previous time period. So the same students but different time. However, the complexity of the content has changed and would be different in these 2 periods. So that's a big question for me at the moment.
Great, thanks, Ruslan. But again, do keep in mind that by collecting baseline data and then post-intervention data, that you are still creating usable knowledge. Again, it's not generalizable knowledge. It's not knowledge you could take and apply someplace else. But you generally will always be able to create usable knowledge by using pre-test or pre-intervention data versus post-intervention data and comparing those 2. All right, anyone else?
Oh, yep, we've got Denise. Okay, Denise.
One of the things that I think I learned from this case study that I was already thinking about when we did the learning log for this week was to use triangulation as much as possible. I know she tried to use DIBELS, which is, well-respected testing. She had 4 different assessments within it, some for fluency, some for what else I made the most? Some for accuracy of the reading and all that. But she also had her own notes that she was taking. She had the attitude survey. So she was trying to use a couple of things. And I think the more of those, the more methods you can use, obviously you're going to be able to generalize even more whatever outcome is reached.
Great, thanks for that. And Denise, again, I know that you know this, but just as a reminder for folks, especially if you are working on a topic that has to do with literacy, within your schools, you will already have a lot of these standardized tests that are being used by your EAL and learning support staff. So it is important when you think about using standardized tests to consider the assessments that you already have access to. You may have access to textbook-generated tests. You may have access to a number of things that have been developed by outside sources, and you should always try to utilize those to the extent that they're relevant to your research projects, and then add on your own assessments above and beyond that. Because, again, action research is meant to be embedded in your practice, and so the more authentic the assessments, authentic in terms of they're the same assessments you would be using anyway, the more this lends itself to the process.
Okay, we've got D.
And D.
Okay, D.
For me, this has raised the question of, if I look at the research I've been considering, because I'm wanting to talk to students who have left middle school and the program, getting baseline data is really tricky. So I have been considering the idea of using similar or modified questions with 7th grade and 8th grade at the beginning of the school year. But now it's come up for me is how valid is that when it's actually not the same group who are going to be experiencing the intervention or have experienced the intervention? How do I know that the data I get from the younger ones is a valid baseline for comparing or looking at what I get back from students who might be 16 or 19 or 21.
Yeah. So Dee, the interesting thing about that is that you have 2 pieces that you need to match up. You need to actually match up the intervention that you used in the year that those students were in the middle school with that cohort of students that you're finding or that you're able to sample in your follow-up survey. Because, again, one of the reasons that you would use action research methodology is to figure out how to shape that intervention. And if your intervention itself changed over time, which, for most teachers, they don't teach the same thing the same way every time they do it, it kind of evolves over time, typically getting better and stronger and all of those kinds of things. You'll want to actually use your teaching notes from past years to try to create a profile of what the intervention looked like in each of those years. What were the objectives? To what extent did you feel that students, looking back over records, that students achieved those objectives? And then having that as a piece that matches up with the data you're collecting from students that are older now. You're absolutely right that typically you would approach this in a longitudinal way, so that you would start collecting data with your first group that you teach, and you wouldn't collect the post data from them until they had gotten into the high school. But I think that there is a lot that you can learn about designing those survey tools or those assessment tools to actually assess that afterward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Jane wants to take.
And Jane.
Always the Jane, popping up the hand. It's actually brought home to me a little bit more about, when I look at how long should my study be, for example, it would require me, I think, to return to the literature, go back to the review and see if anything has been said about that. So while you're designing your process, there's no harm. In fact, it probably necessitates you to keep going back to the literature and finding out what else there is out there that mentions anything about some of the variables that you're trying to either select or deselect.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to move on to the next part of the session, and I want to draw your attention to Learning Log 6.1. If you want to pull that up or pull that out, however you've created that document, I'm going to ask you to refer to this document in the final exercises in this session. I'm going to just briefly go through the components of this action plan piece. And of course, one of the things you're going to notice is that things like the action research question come from previous sessions. You've developed that question already. You may have modified it and refined it. You've already thought about what the intervention is going to look like. And so in this next form, you're actually recording some things that you already thought about and already decided, and then adding some additional elements. So if we start with the action research question, again, this is something we've worked with a lot. As we've discussed before, a good research question is meaningful, focused, important to your role as an education professional, and also important to the learners that you work with. You also have discovered that it's important to remember that your first action research question may change as you go through the process, even to the point where the research is getting underway. And again, this is all due to the recursive and iterative nature of action research. When it comes to the planned intervention, the shorthand for this one is this is the purpose. This is the purpose for why you're doing the piece of action research. The planned intervention is an overview of the sequence of actions you're going to take and a description of the intended outputs or outcomes. And again, these are typically some aspect of teacher professional development or student learning. Data collection methods, we are just beginning to talk about. So again, in this section, you're going to describe 2 or more ways that you're going to measure the outcomes. And those are the changes in teacher professional development or teacher competence, or changes in learning for learners. Some of your data collection methods are going to produce quantitative data, data that appears in numbers or will be in a number form. And other parts of your data collection are going to produce qualitative data, which will be descriptions. It's important to keep in mind that both of those are valuable and that you're going to need a balance of those to answer your research question. Some of your data collection methods are going to use standardized assessments or assessments that have been developed by other curriculum specialists, but you're also going to be using teacher-created assessments. And it's important to remember that those should be moderated. And what I mean by moderated is that you should discuss those and possibly even trial those with other teachers in order to improve their reliability and validity. But just as in when you're planning curriculum and you might be using Understanding by Design or UBD, where you would define the assessment before you would design the activity, action research works the same way. You need to have a good understanding of what you're going to assess and how you're going to assess it so that you can design the intervention to bring about the changes that you're trying to measure. If you design all the actions first and then you try to find assessments that are going to fit, it's going to make it a lot more difficult to understand the extent to which your intervention has actually achieved the things that it's trying to achieve. Finally, the action steps. The action steps are the process. They're the sequence of steps you're going to take to achieve the purpose and achieve that purpose in a way that produces the outcomes in a way that you can measure them. So the action steps really tie together all of the other parts of all the other thinking that's gone into the action research project. The action steps typically come last, although you may have started with an idea of what the intervention was going to be and how it was going to work. In reality now, you're looking back at all of the other pieces that you pulled together, and then you're creating the action steps, which again is simply a sequence of steps that you're going to take. It's the process. And again, as you think about your timeline of the process, please remember that action research is recursive and it works in a cycle. Right now, you're planning what you may be perceiving as your first and only cycle of research, but you also may have gotten to the point already where you're recognizing that your first research question is, you're already anticipating the second question that's going to arise from the first question. And that's just a natural part of this. The challenge is to kind of remain focused in that first question with your eye on the horizon to what that second question would be. All right, so back to Learning Log 6.1. We are going to use the paired chat function in GoToMeeting, and the only person who's not here so far is Simon, I believe. Simon, if you are here, could you, let's just look through. Yeah, we weren't certain if Simon was going to join us, and it appears that he has not joined us yet. So in this paired chat, it will be Dawn and Kelly, Gabby and Ruslan, Jane and Shabana, Kelly and Tom, Dee and Louise, and Denise and Latifa. What I would like you to do, this is going to be in 2 sections. I'm going to give you a set of questions, and I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to discuss them in the paired chat. I'm then going to give you 2 more questions and ask you to discuss those in the paired chat. You'll have only 5 minutes for the second one. So this is a 15-minute exercise approximately. If you do finish your discussion early, please raise your hand, and if we see that everyone has raised their hand, we'll go on to the next question. And also keep in mind that when you're responding, type some words, send them, type some words, send them. That keeps the other person engaged on the other end so that they're not wondering if you're thinking or if you're writing or just wondering generally what you're doing. I will say in advance of starting this exercise that we've had some feedback from people, and there's real interest in having some live chats, some audio chats, and we're going to say a little bit at the end of this session about what we plan for session 7. So again, let me go back to those pairings and show you the pairings so that you know who you're with. Please just note the name of the person who you're working with. Again, Denise is going to be working with Latifa because Simon has not been able to join us today. Please go ahead as soon as you're ready to begin discussing those questions.
Okay, hello everyone. Just to let you know that we've got 1 minute left. So if you have finished, please don't forget to raise your hand. Thank you.
Okay. That's it. Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. Again, I apologize in advance if I've cut short any conversations. I know that next time when we go to the live chat session that you'll actually be able to do a lot more discussing in that shorter period of time. So we're looking forward to trying that. The final question that I'd like you to discuss today, and we're going to give you about 5 minutes, which is about half the time to do it this time, are what are the challenges of incorporating action research in your professional practice? As you begin thinking about actually now carrying out this idea that you've been developing, whether you carry it out or not, what do you recognize are going to be some of the challenges, and how do you think you might address those challenges? Again, if you'd have a paired chat with the person who you've been speaking with, we'll let you know when there's 2 minutes left, and then we'll call you back at the end of 5 minutes. Thank you.
Right, just a reminder, you've got 1 minute left, so if you're in the middle of something, try and wrap it up. Thank you.
Yeah, it's guidance. So is the mic on? Yeah. Oh. Next slide. Hi, welcome back, everybody. Again, I apologize if I've cut some of those discussions a little bit short today. We want to go ahead and start wrapping up today's session. And so in the same way that we end every session, I'd like to ask if you have any questions about this session or previous sessions. And I would invite you to either type them into the chat box or to raise your hand and ask them. If there are questions that we can answer now, I'll try to do that briefly. If not, we will add them to the list of things that we will address in session 7. So again, if you'd like to just type them into the chat box or raise your hand if you have a question about what we've been talking about today.
I think Dee's got Dee? Hi Dee, you've got your hand.
Oh, yeah, sorry, my mistake.
Oh, okay. Thank you. No questions.
So there are no immediate questions. Again, if things arise as you prepare for next week's session, or if you think of something, please email us anytime. Some of you have done that, and we really look forward to getting those emails. So ask your questions anytime that they arise.
Okay.
Tifa.
Right, so as we finish this session, just to remind you that there is a checkout survey. We do go through the results every week, and we're trying to make small changes as we're going along. So please take time to, the few minutes it takes to fill this survey out. If you email me once you've done it, I will send out the materials for next week. Thank you very much. You also have a learning log 6.2, which is for your learning points from this week. So, please complete that. It will really help you for future reference. And also, if you are doing a sim project next year, then it's a really great way to sort of record what you're doing. So please take time to do that.
Yep, and I just wanted to follow up on what I had mentioned earlier. Next week, we are going to try to introduce a paired live chat into the session, and we're going to do that using Skype. And so what we would like you to do is to please have a second device available. I know that some of you are tech savvy enough that you can figure out how to do it on your machine, but we want to make sure that we can be in contact with you via the GoToTraining site, as well as have you being interacting using a device to have that live interaction. So we're going to be sending you a list of your live chat pairings for next week. We are going to be pairing people who are in Doha with other people in Doha just to ensure that you have a good connection. You need to make sure, please, that the device that you bring along, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone, has Skype installed. And before you join session 7, we're going to ask you to share your Skype ID with the person who you've been assigned to for the live chat. Again, we'll be sending you some more information about that in the follow-up email. But again, please think about organizing a second device to bring along to the session next time.
Okay, and that concludes session number 6. So thank you all again for your time. as per usual. If you've got anything, then just feel free to contact us between now and next week. And in the meantime, you'll be receiving all the materials, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good week.